The air in the bunkhouse hung thick with the scent of coffee grounds and worn leather. The light filtering through the small, grimy window was the color of weak tea, marking the slow, predictable end of another ranch day. I sat on my cot, slowly polishing the silver buckle in my best belt, an automatic task that mirrored the dependable rhythm of my life. I was trying, and failing, to ignore the easy, resonant laughter coming from the corner. That laughter belonged to Josiah. He was a traveling blacksmith who had ridden in 2 days ago, and he moved through the dusty monochrome ranch like a splash of color. Josiah was all loose-limbed energy, quick smiles, and stories of mountains and coastal towns I'd only read about in dime novels. He seemed to carry the air of those distant places with him. Salt tang from the coast, the sharp, clean scent of pine from the high Sierras. And every time he moved, the quiet predictability of the bunkhouse seemed to shift on its axis. He didn't just talk, he narrated, filling the silence with vivid sketches of people and places that made the Double C feel impossibly small. I found myself rearranging my own routine, subconsciously waiting for his next movement or resonant laugh, resenting the pull even as I cherished the disruption. I had worked the Double C my whole life. I was solid, reliable, and utterly silent. I didn't know how to speak the language of easy, and Josiah's effortless charm grated on my nerves, mostly because I couldn't stop watching him. He was a force of nature, and I was just the soil that received the rain. Tonight, the rest of the hands were down at the saloon, seeking noise and whiskey. Josiah was sitting by the stove, nursing a cracked mug of lukewarm water, humming a song I didn't recognize. The glow of the embers caught the high planes of his cheekbones and the dark curl of his hair. "You never head into town, Samuel?" Josiah asked, his voice soft, the first time it hadn't been booming since he arrived. It was strange to hear him speak without an audience. Town's loud. Too many voices you don't need to listen to." "And the ranch isn't?" Josiah roached into the profound, heavy silence of the plains that pressed in on the small building. "This silence, it's a choice, Samuel. It feels like a boundary." "A different kind of loud," I admitted. "The silence out here means things. It means wind or coyote or maybe the approach of rain. It isn't wasted." I finally looked up. Josiah's eyes, the color of wet river stone, were fixed on me, not with casual interest, but with a quiet, seeking focus that made my heart knock against my ribs. "I reckon this place is where you belong, Samuel. You've got roots here. You're built into the framework of this operation." I hesitated, the truth of his observation stinging because it also felt like a limitation. "And you, Josiah, where do you belong? You seem to belong everywhere and nowhere." A flicker of deep loneliness crossed his face before he smiled, although the light didn't quite reach his eyes this time. "Wherever the sun sets. I keep moving, I guess. Easier that way. Nothing to mourn when you ride out in the morning." He walked slowly across the floor, his shadow lengthening toward me, and stopped right in front of my cot. He reached out, his hand hesitating just above my shoulder. I held my breath, acutely aware of the rough texture of his working clothes and the smell of wood smoke clinging to him. "But maybe," Josiah murmured, his breath warm and close, "maybe it's easier to stop, to find a reason not to watch the horizon anymore." I didn't move. I felt the phantom heat of his touch before the actual contact, a gentle pressure against the tight muscle in my neck. It was a simple, accidental gesture of camaraderie, yet the small, hard calluses of Josiah's palm felt like a brand, breaking the isolation I had lived in my whole life. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. "Yeah," I whispered, the polished buckle forgotten in my lap. "Maybe it is."
The foreman assigned me to assist Josiah, which meant days spent in the cramped forge. The work demanded synchronization. I held the metal, he hammered. It was a strange, wordless form of communication. We spoke only in grunts and sharp directions, yet I learned to read the slight tensing of his muscles, the angle of his shoulder, anticipating the precise moment the sledgehammer would fall, ensuring my grip was exactly right. It was a dance of immense power, and in that intense heat, covered in the same grit and sweat, the physical necessity of relying on him became a kind of dizzying intimacy. The rhythm was hypnotic. The iron glowed cherry red, the hiss of the water barrel, the clang of the hammer, a forceful, permanent sound. "Patience of a saint you got, Samuel," he said after we finished one axle. "Most men I'd have lost the thumb by now. You're solid as the granite under this ranch." "I just grew up on a ranch. You learn to brace yourself. You learn what's fixed and what's moving. It's the difference between a fence post and a tumbleweed." He grinned. "And what am I then? Fixed or moving?" I turned away, trying to hide the blush the question brought on. "You're moving. That's why you're good at what you do. You shape the mental because you're not fixed to it. You impose your will. I keep moving because I'm scared to stop. If I stop, I have to look at the past or think about the future. It gets lonely, though. Nothing ever stays, so why bother laying stone?" He looked at me, serious now. "You've got to have dreams bigger than just this pasture." "I don't know about bigger. I just want what's here to stay here," I said, finally looking back at the brilliant, chaotic fire of the forge. "I want to build a foundation that won't blow away. I watch you, Josiah. You're everything I'm not. Free." I watched the fire reflect in his eyes, feeling the sheer vulnerability of my confession. He pushed off the wall and stepped closer, tapping a finger lightly on my chest. "You're wrong, Samuel. You aren't just fixed to the land, you're rooted. And I'll take a root over freedom any day, if it's a strong one." A few days later, the foreman sent us to repair a remote fence line. We were miles from the ranch house, just 2 men, 2 horses, and a small canvas tent. It felt less like work and more like exile, and I was grateful for the forced isolation. That night we lay shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with tension. Every time Josiah shifted, his denim brushing against mine, a charge went through me. I lay there, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the soft cadence of the crickets, and the overwhelming proximity of the man who had torn the quiet apart. I keep moving because I'm scared to stop. If I stop, I have to look at the past or think about the future. It gets lonely, though. Nothing ever stays, so why bother laying stone?" He looked at me, serious now. "You've got to have dreams bigger than just this pasture." "I don't know about bigger. I just want what's here to stay here," I said, finally looking back at the brilliant, chaotic fire of the forge. "I want to build a foundation that won't blow away. I watch you, Josiah. You're everything I'm not. Free." I watched the fire reflect in his eyes, feeling the sheer vulnerability of my confession. He pushed off the wall and stepped closer, tapping a finger lightly on my chest. "You're wrong, Samuel. You aren't just fixed to the land, you're rooted. And I'll take a root over freedom any day, if it's a strong one." His calloused fingers found the curve of my jaw. It was the softest touch he'd given me, and it broke the dam of my years of quiet longing. And then he kissed me. It wasn't easy or charming or practiced. It was a fierce, honest seeking of something real. His lips were chapped, tasting faintly of coffee and dust. I kissed him back with all the quiet intensity I usually reserved for hard work, trying to communicate everything I couldn't say. The the loneliness, the yearning, and the sudden terrifying certainty that this man was my true north. The next few hours blurred into a profound shared silence. We shed our clothes in the darkness, and the soft, cool contact of skin against skin was a revelation. It was a desperate, joyful consumption of barriers, a stripping away of all the psychological fences I'd built around myself. Josiah's touch was everything his personality was, passionate, unrestrained, and focused only on the present moment. He taught me a rough, exhilarating vocabulary of touch that left me breathless. We didn't need light to see each other. The landscape of his body under my hands, the smooth warmth of his back, the hard plane of his stomach was suddenly more familiar than the hills I'd worked all my life. We moved with the same instinctive synchronization we had found at the forge, a powerful, fierce rhythm hammered out in the desert night. When we finally rested, tangled together, his arm warm across my chest, the weight of it was the only anchor I cared about. The silence now was no longer a boundary, it was a blanket. I was still Samuel, but now I was rooted next to someone else.
We were riding back 2 days later, still carrying that night's secret like a tangible thing, when we saw them. 3 men leading a small group of the ranch's prized breeding stock down a hidden arroyo. Rustlers. "They're taking the Black Star bull line," I hissed, immediately focused. "We have to stop them. They'll ruin years of careful breeding." "There's 3 of them, Samuel," Josiah cautioned, grabbing my bridle, his eyes wide with a familiar flicker of the urge to ride away. "We ride for the ranch. Get the others. We can't take 3 men." "No time," I said, already pulling my rifle from the scabbard. My loyalty to the double C ran deeper than caution. It was my land, my life, and I wasn't letting anyone steal the foundation I was built on. This was the physical manifestation of everything I cared about, and I reacted without thinking. We charged the ridge, the rustlers scattered, firing wildly. I focused on trying to scare the cattle back, riding hard toward the lead man. I felt the searing, sharp pain in my side before I heard the second shot. My world went sideways. The smell of gunpowder and hot blood filled the air, and the desert ground rushed up to meet me. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked out of me, the pain quickly turning into a dull, spreading fire. My vision tunneled. The ranch, the cattle, the foundation I was trying to protect, it all slipped away, leaving only the sound of panic and the desperate hope that Josiah had fled to safety. The last thing I saw was Josiah, who had dismounted, pulling his own rifle. His face was pure fury, the easy charm stripped away, replaced by something fierce and protective, like a wild animal defending its nest. He wasn't running. I faded in and out, hearing the chaos of shouts and gunfire. When I finally found true consciousness, it was dark, and a tremendous pressure was on my wound. I gasped. "Samuel, stay still," Josiah ordered, his voice tight with panic and effort. He had me dragged behind a rocky outcrop, and he was ripping strips from his own shirt, packing the wound. He used his belt as a makeshift tourniquet high on my ribs, working with brutal efficiency that spoke of desperate self-control. "The cattle," I mumbled, my voice thin. "They ran. I scared the rest off. They didn't get far. We'll find them," he said, his hands shaking slightly. He finished binding me tightly. He looked at me, his wet eyes reflecting the distant stars. "You idiot," he whispered, a break in his voice. "You absolute, selfless idiot. You almost died for a bull. When you went down, I felt the panic rise up, the old itch to ride, to disappear, to save my own skin and leave the trouble behind. I felt the panic rise up, the old itch to ride, to disappear, to save my own skin and leave the trouble behind. I felt the real danger. You are my root. I choose you. I choose this ranch. I'm staying." His voice cracked on the final word, a rare vulnerability from the man who projected such confidence. It was the only vow I needed to hear. He kissed me, a desperate, fierce pledge, before he hauled me onto my horse and slowly, carefully, began the long, agonizing ride back to the ranch. My recovery was slow, tedious, and painful, but Josiah was there every day. He traded his hammer for a chair by my bedside, quietly reading to me from his dime novels. He didn't just tend the wound, he tended my spirit. He'd bring in pieces of wood to whittle, filling the air with the scent of cedar and spruce, transforming the room from a sickbed into a small, warm workshop. He tended the wound with a patience that astonished me, his large hands moving with the same focused delicacy he used on hot iron. Our domesticity was built in that small, shadowed room. Quiet conversations, shared silence, and the simple understanding that neither of us was going anywhere. When I was finally able to walk, the ranch owner, grateful for Josiah's bravery, offered him a permanent, official contract, doubling his offered salary. He hesitated. He held the paper like it was a live snake. "It's what you wanted," I said one evening, watching him sharpen a tool, "a chance to settle." "It's what you wanted for me," he corrected, not looking up. "I'm scared, Samuel. If I sign this, I'm tied down, permanently. And I've seen what happens when you're tied down and the tie breaks. When you commit, the loss is monumental. When you run, it's just dust." "Then don't tie yourself to a piece of paper," I said, leaning in, pressing my heel inside against his arm. "Tie yourself to me. I'm not a contract. I'm a man who loves you." He looked up then, his eyes searching my face, a deep conflict raging behind the surface. "You're asking me to give up the road, the safety of never belonging. I'm asking you to trust the anchor. I am not going anywhere, and this land isn't going anywhere. If you leave, you'll be lonely, wandering toward nothing. If you stay, we're two against the world. We define what home is now, Josiah. It's not just the soil, it's the two of us, a fixed point of warmth in a cold world. And if you ever need to ride, we'll ride together, but we'll always have a porch light waiting." He smiled, that soft, genuine smile that was just for me. He slowly crumpled the contract in his hand, a small, rebellious act. "Okay, I'll stay, but on one condition. We build a new forge, a bigger one, right next to the stables. Not just a patch-up job, a real building. We build it together, Samuel. Our own foundation, one that can't be bought or sold." The new forge was hammered out over the next 4 months, built from stone and iron and sweat. It was more than a workshop. It was a symbol of Josiah's vow to stay. He poured his heart into its construction, mixing the mortar himself, selecting the straightest beams, making sure every joint and nail was set with utter permanence. I worked alongside him, sometimes simply passing tools, sometimes hauling lumber, watching the free spirit slowly, deliberately anchor himself to this piece of ground. He was happy, truly rooted, and I was content, watching the man who brought color to my monochrome world find peace in a steady rhythm. The final piece of his vow was the short trip he planned. He came to me one morning with 2 perfectly shaped, simple iron rings he had forged. No engravings, just heavy, honest metal, the kind that feels right in your hand. He explained they were quenched in creek water and hammered from a piece of metal he had scavenged from his very first anvil, a final sacred offering from his wandering past to our shared future. "We need to ride," he said, his eyes bright. "Not running away, just riding somewhere new and then coming home. We'll make the circle whole, Samuel." We took the road east for 3 days, stopping only when we reached a small, dusty county seat called Haven Creek. In Haven Creek, there was a man who served as the justice of the peace. He was old and quiet, and he didn't ask too many questions. He looked at us, 2 ranch hands in slightly cleaner dusters, saw the sincerity in our eyes, and simply nodded. No fanfare, no judgment, just the quiet acceptance of two souls making a permanent choice. We stood in his small, hot office, wearing our dusty Sunday best. Josiah held my hand, his palm calloused and warm. The words the justice said were simple. Words about commitment and partnership, about weathering storms and sharing burdens. They weren't a contract with the ranch or a promise to the land. They were just for us, forged in secrecy and silence. When the justice finished, Josiah looked at me, tears gathering in the corners of his bright eyes. "I ran a long time, Samuel," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "But I finally found where the road ends." "It doesn't end," I told him, slipping the iron ring onto his finger, feeling the heavy, permanent weight of the metal. "It starts here, and now we ride it together." I put my ring on, feeling the solid connection to him, the metal cold, but the feeling warm. He grinned, his voice ringing with the old, free joy I loved so much. "Then let's get back home, husband." We rode back to the Double C, 2 men on 2 horses, quiet and rooted, but with the boundless open freedom of the entire prairie stretched out before us. Our lives were fixed now, forged together like good steel. The sun set behind us, painting the new forge in gold and purple, and it was the best, most beautiful journey of my life.